Welcome to this month's Ben's Book Club. Up until now, this has been a virtual monthly gathering to discuss books which link to Benjamin Franklin, the 18th century, and American history. This month, we're going hybrid. So we are delighted to be welcoming Steve Martin to speak to our in-person and our virtual audience today. Steve Martin is a museums consultant and author, specialising in Black British history and literature. He is the author of several books of historical fiction and non-fiction for teenage and adult readers, including Britain's Slave Trade, written for Channel 4 to tie in with its documentary of the same name, also Jupiter, Amidshops, and Jupiter Williams. This evening, we'll be discussing Steve Martin's historical fiction, Incomparable World. This narrative reimagines the 1780s in London, showcasing the untold stories of African Americans grappling with their post-war freedom. It was recently selected by Booker Prize-winning author Bernardina Baristo to be part of Penguin's Black Britain Writing Back series. In terms of the format of this evening, I'll start by asking, in fact, Steve is going to start with a reading, and then I'll ask some questions. Then we'll open up the discussion and take any questions from the floor, and if we have any coming in from those joining us via Zoom. So if you are joining us virtually today, please do put any questions you have either in the chat or in the Q&A, and my colleague will read those out when we get to the Q&A section. So welcome, Steve. Thank you so much for joining us. And we wanted to start with the reading, if that's okay.
That's fine, excellent. Yes, I'd just like to briefly set the scene before I kick off. The action, such as it is in this book, takes place in 1786, or 11 years since Mr. Franklin left these premises to return to the United States. And the protagonists are former soldiers who served in the Revolutionary War, War of Independence, and I just had some fun with them, putting them in late 18th century London and seeing what could go wrong. And here they are, scene I'm about to read from. One of them, Buckram, who is illiterate, by the way, or semi-literate by the time we get to this part of the narrative. He is joining his partner, I suppose, or his intended, Charlotte, at the banks of the Thames in order to take a boat trip down to the pleasure garden at Vauxhall. They battered their way through curtains of flies buzzing about the waterfront. Like Charlotte, the others had bought bags of rubbish on their way down. Charlotte was wiping tears from her eyes and wallowing in the fussy embraces of the black couple. Dismissing Liz's chortled greeting, Buckram strode up to the cuddling threesome. "Oh, Buckram," she said, catching his arm and dragging him to the centre of attention. "Buckram, I'd like you to meet my parents." His jaw dropped. His solar plexus seesaw. "Parents?" "Pleased to make your acquaintance, young man," the kind-faced, grey-whiskered man offered Buckram his hand. Buckram was paralysed. This was something he could never have imagined, seeing a black adult in the company of their parents. It was as much as he could do to gasp and take the old man's hand. "Charlotte's told us all about you. The pleasure's all mine," blurted Buckram nonsensically. He wondered how any black man living in England could radiate such open warmth as Mr. Teller. "And this is my lady wife, Anne." Buckram tipped his hat and bowed to the tiny woman with tired features. She emitted a squeak and returned the bow with more of a wince than a smile. Her eyes were like Charlotte's, though harder, more contained, unable to cloud the caution and dismay swimming in them. "Oh, do hurry up," implored Lizzie. "The boatman can't wait all day." She flashed the pilot and oarsman a toothy apologetic smile. The ferry was called Wheeler's Right. "Are we to embark or no, father?" asked Charlotte, sounding just like a 5-year-old. "One moment, daughter." He was still beaming at Buckram. "Our introductions are unfinished. Mr. Buckram, allow me to introduce our dear friends and neighbours, the Barbers, Francis and Betsy. They travelled down with us from Lichfield." "Ah, so you're our Charlotte's intended, are you?" asked Mr. Barber. Buckram stuttered. I'm joshing you, lad. Take no notice. Francis Barber. You may have heard my name mentioned in these parts. Buckram shook his head, wondering why this man had adopted the mannerisms of a country squire. He slapped Buckram on the shoulder and wrung his hands too fiercely as if to hide some private disappointment. The Barbers were a short, good-looking couple in their late 40s or early 50s. Mrs. Barber curtsied and grimaced sweetly. She had the face of a white woman who has lived for 2 years in the heart of the English countryside, her outspoken black husband of 10 years. She looked absolutely terrified. "Oi, you crossing or what?" growled an oarsman. His fellow rower was lying asleep under the seats. "To the pleasure gardens then, my good man," shouted Francis. "Let's to Vauxhall." As the ferry wobbled in the water, steadying itself for the first stroke, Charlotte blurted, "This is making me seasick." She meant it. "I've got to get off. Tell them to turn back." Crouching on all fours, she felt her way to the side of the boat. "Gentlemen, row on," ordered Francis. "Ladies, restrain your sister." Lizzie and Mrs. Brooks immediately shifted apart to create a new place for Charlotte. They held her carefully but warily, as if she was a leper with a fortune. The ferry pulled out, rocking sharply as the oars cut against the current. "That's not like her at all," said Mr. Tell, watching his daughter gulp and convulse. "My girl has never been a soft one." His wife looked at him as if he was insane. "London," boomed Francis. Buckram thought he'd been too quiet for too long. "London, queen of all of cities. Best place for a young man, let me tell you." He stood upright in the boat, and to his wife's ill-concealed dismay, began to recite. Assemblies, parks, horse feasts in city halls, lectures and trials, plays, committees, balls, wells, bedlams, executions, Smithfield scenes, and fortune-tellers' caves and lions' dens. There was tolerant applause. The boatmen cackled. Buckram had never heard anything like this. The only part of the verse he could relate to was bridewells. Now that Francis had their attention, he began to bore them with accounts of his perambulations and excesses in the company of the good doctor. Buckram felt relaxed enough in himself to pose a question. How did he and Francis Barber come to be friends? "Young man," he whispered, barely audible above the Ortiz water. "Litchfield's a small place. My wife of part, his, is the only black face I see. Can't always choose your friends, eh?" "That's the truth, Mr. Tell," concurred Buckram. This was the first time he had ever unmockingly addressed another black man as Mr. "Uh-oh," said Mr. Tell, pointing at Betsy with her head over the side by the prow. "Not another sick woman, I pray." "I doubt it," said Buckram, checking the horizon and the bag between his feet. Betsy had obtained a clear view upstream. Buckram saw how her muscles locked as another ferry rounded the river by Lambeth Palace. This ferry was full of bare-chested men with their hats turned back to front. "Oh, Jesus, what new torment!" whimpered Charlotte's mother as the ferry changed course to draw up alongside Wheeler's right. "This, good woman," Francis declared excitedly, "is your famous London River, Josh. Great sport, wouldn't you say, pilot?" The pilot was completely uninterested. "Let the arch ruffians make the first move," Buckram said loud, reluctantly acknowledging his role as the ablest-bodied male passenger. "Ahoy there!" hailed a river ragamuffin. "You ugly black sons of bitches! Your mothers are all boards, and your women are tuppenny tops." Much laughter. "Oh well," Buckram sighed. "Let's get it over with." He stood up and cleared his throat. "Talk to me like that? You..." Very poor language used there. "Talk to me like that? Go bend and say your mouthpiece." With the exception of Mrs. Tell, the passengers and crew of Wheeler's Right cheered loudly. "Talk to me like that?" came the reply. "I'll run a rusty needle through my old mare's dew and sew up your fat black lips." Buckram cleared his throat again. Someone patted his back. "Allow me," said Francis, eager to join in the exchange. He stood. "You lousy crew of grey-bellied rats, the only clap you've clapped is your mother's. Talk to me like..." A soggy onion flew across the water and caught him square on the nose. "Ooh, that's it," squealed Lizzie, pulling up her bag of muck. "Here we go. Have at them." She hurled 2 rotten eggs at the onion thrower. They missed him, but one splattered neatly against the opposing pilot's neck. The air was soon thick with malodorous missiles flying between boats. Charlotte discreetly emptied her stomach over the port side as the battle raged. Mrs. Brooks screamed. A heavy, pungent projectile had exploded on her apron. Dung! She gasped. They've got dung! That's not fair. They're using dung. Bob Cram was holding his last lamb's skull, and Betsy was taking aim with baby carrots. Lizzie chucked a handful of compacted maggots. More manure was coming on board. It was not looking good. The pilot of Wheeler's Right tugged a fat sack from his stern and tipped out its contents. Here, use this. Great chunks of coal littered the deck around him. Look lively. Won't get your hands dirty, will it? They pounced on their new ammunition and commenced a judiciously aimed barrage against the gong wielders. Two of their crew fell immediately. The river rats had run out of things to throw. The volleys of coal grew heavier, became demented in fact. Even Mrs. Tell was up and lobbing. The enemy pilot pulled down his breeches and mooned at the black people. He singled out Betsy for a final piece of abuse. Ah, you dirty sow. Better you marry a pig than a monkey. May dogs defile your unborn litter. I'll go lot of you. Francis bunged a last lump of coal, but it fell short and splashed dead in the wake of the departing ferry. The swine, he fumed. Listen to them. The scoundrels sang as they sculled out of reach. The blackies have taken my sweetheart away. The blackies have taken my sweetheart away. The blackies have taken my sweetheart away. Turalay, turali, turalay. Oh. That's where things go.
Thank you so much, Steve. And that really does give a sense of the kind of lively London that was very sort of viscerally created, and also the real challenges that facing the protagonists that when they find themselves here.
Yes.
And that leads me on to my first question, which was how did you come to write about this subject? What was the inspiration behind it?
There are a couple of inspirations. The first was my own response to coming across a number of prints by Hogarth, who was depicting this area and most of central London in the 1730s. And as someone who'd really lived in London for a while by then, it was a London I recognised. I recognised the buildings of Kingly Street, sort of Maiden Street, the cobbles of Covent Garden Market, St Paul's Church by the market. It was all very familiar. But amongst this very familiar setting, I saw that he had included black people. And many of them just seemed to be part of everyday life in London. I mean, obviously, that he would occasionally use a black person to make a comment or to, as a sort of visual bar against often pomposity. But there are several black people who are featured who just get to be part of the surroundings. And my question was, who are they? Where do they come from? What are they doing in 18th century London? And why doesn't anyone talk about them? Following on from that, I mean, I've always been interested in the 18th century, but I'd never read any book about the 18th century or a piece of fiction around the 18th century, which I thought really captured the excitement of the time, the sheer energy required to get through an average day. Was there such a thing as an average day? The sheer demands mentally and physically that living in the 18th century London would make on someone, and also the social mobility as well. And I just wanted to do this set of people justice. The more I learned about it, the more I realised that, you know, I had to give some sort of voice to almost the first large recorded wave of black settlement in the capital, which very few people speak about now, let alone 20 years or so behind the
Absolutely, definitely. And it was at such a time of change. You mentioned social mobility and a kind of growth of middle classes, and then how migrating at that time, how that all kind of fits together as well.
Yes.
Yeah,
because the other thing which was extraordinary, well, it shouldn't have been, but it came sort of something surprise to me when I was doing the first load of research, was the spectrum of people the spectrum of black people, that although, of course, not everyone was enslaved, but you had many people who were just individuals in their own right, people who were shopkeepers not far from where we're sitting. I'm sure that Benjamin Franklin, who strolled across to Whitehall to Charles Street and bought fruits and vegetables from Ignatius Sancho, one of the early black writers, he certainly have seen the black beggars along the Strand, the black soldiers, the black sailors. He just met an array of people. So what fascinates me is that it's never a case of one story about one set of people in one place doing one kind of thing. So yeah, I had to give them life.
Absolutely. And you just briefly referenced research there, and although it is a fictional narrative, there's so much historical detail, and that reading reflects a lot about the details of the Vauxhall Gardens and the ferrymen, and also real historical figures like Francis Barber, who was Samuel Johnson's inheritor. So I just wondered if you could talk a bit more about your research process and how that went about.
Okay, I absolutely adored the research here. In fact, it was more fun to research than to write. Of course, it was a world without end. My main ports of call were the National Archives, the British Library, and local archives and family history collections were very, very, very useful. But as I said, it did take me over completely. There was no detail too irrelevant for my purposes as I was fleshing out this world where there was actually a branch of employment for young people, which involved catching mice, killing the mice, skinning the mice, then curing the mouse skins with the fur still on, which would then be cut out and shaped to be fake eyebrows for ladies. And I thought, what a thing, the world must know. Because in some ways, yes, it's a very familiar, I think it's of the 18th century, it's the most familiar stretch that we can get to before things get genuinely bizarre for the 20th, 21st century viewer or reader. But as well as being familiar, it's also very, very strange. And that's what I really loved about the writing and the research. As I was walking around London, it was literally a fever state. And I could just see where everything lay, how everything worked, the pubs that were still open, the way the parks were laid out. So it was, so London, in a sense, became a character, possibly the major character in it, and the impact that this city has on those of us who choose to live here and call it home.
Absolutely, and it's really interesting to see the lives sort of on the Georgian streets of London rather than sort of behind closed doors in these houses as well. And then in terms of, we heard thinking about Buckram, but just there's other protagonists, Georgie and William. I wonder if you could say a little bit about them and their stories and what was the inspiration behind them as well.
Okay, well, the inspiration behind them was, again, one of my fascinations, obsessions, which is with world of military, particularly maritime affairs, but also land-based warfare. And the fact that with the collapse of the British enterprise in North America, the British ambitions in North America in 1883, you saw the exodus from that part of the continent of thousands of black loyalists being those soldiers, many of them formerly enslaved, who had been offered their freedom in exchange for service in the British Army. They took the King's shilling, and of course, once the British had lost those campaigns, they were obliged to flee for their lives, those who could, because a lot of the slave owners were coming to reclaim their human property. And yes, there were regiments such as the Ethiopian Pioneers, which were formed of formerly enslaved black men, but you saw people running with their families largely to Nova Scotia. Some ended up in Jamaica, some in Bermuda, but a significant number of them ended up here on the streets of London and also in Dublin as well. So I wanted to follow their fortunes because here they were, dumped at the heart of the empire, in the belly of the beast, many of them, like Buckram, with barely usable skills. I mean, Buckram can handle horses, and that's the extent of his skill set. William is lucky enough to be literate, and he has commensurate affectations and ambitions. And Georgie is just an out-and-out scoundrel who manages to wheedle and weasel his way through life with some ease. But I wanted to address that spectrum of characters as well, because one of the things that struck me, and I remember that I know that I had placed Buckram at the end of, well, not giving out any secrets here, but he is a small businessman. And one of the phenomena of Georgian London was that spread of black business people, black entrepreneurs, people like Sancho here with his grocery shop, like the extraordinary number of black-owned and run public houses, not just in London, but throughout the British Isles. All sorts of things like employment agencies, just signs of life which almost are absent in 21st century London, but were thriving in the 18th. It absolutely fascinates me. And again, I wanted to do some sort of justice to that.
Absolutely did, and you allude to the fact that it's sort of quite an untouched subject in terms of fictional treatment, and it's very interesting in how it kind of looks at the intersection between African American history and Black British history. And I wondered if you thought there were other areas where there was that intersectional overlap, other periods that you thought deserved kind of more of a look at as well.
Yeah, so it's like a seam running through the centuries. I mean, obviously, when the American states were British possessions, it was, they were one and the same set of histories. But even throughout the 19th century, the Victorian period, particularly in the realm of, say, entertainment, black entertainment is almost dictated by North American fashions and styles, whether that's someone like William Henry Lane, Massajuba, coming over, performing again at the Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens in 1848, and then performing for Queen Victoria, and in a sense laying down that tradition, that very long tradition of minstrelsy in this country. He was a black man, I should have mentioned, or Ira Aldridge, who came over in the 18 teens to this country from New York as a black actor. And he trod the boards not far from where we're sitting, in Drury Lane, and played part of Othello in 1833. But it was very much African American setting the tone then. Again, unfortunately, in a sense, a lot of the political direction has also been taken from African American markets. Saw Booker T. Washington here in 1910, 5 years before he died. So what it has done to a degree is sort of overshadowed a lot of the British writers, political thinkers, activists, and creatives, as we now say, who have really been trailblazers in UK history. So for a long time, black British histories were very much seen as the junior partner to African American histories.
Are there any kind of works by other writers perhaps that came after I think in the introduction and this edition, when you allude to, which is not sure that there is another book that on this particular topic, but I wonder if there are other writers you're aware of that are kind of looking at those intersections.
Writing now?
Yeah.
Not that I would know about. I've very much retreated from writing fiction. And as I said, I don't really go to those parties anymore. So I'm sure there are. In fact, there are. In fact, Dr. Annie Domingo has just published, I think it's called The Book of Martha, Escape from Martha, which is set in the same, actually it's set after Incomparable World. It's set in Victorian Britain, and it features two sisters who have divergent paths, two sisters from what's now Syria, one who ends up becoming a sort of being adopted by Queen Victoria, obviously based on real life, and the other ending up enslaved. So yeah, there are people still writing about it, but yes, it just needs to be spoken about more.
Absolutely. And then, so you mentioned that you kind of stepped away from the world of fiction, so I wondered what you were working on currently.
Oh wow. Loads and loads of stuff. I mean, mostly I work in the heritage sector. So I'm working with the David Livingstone Birthplace Trust in Blantyre outside Glasgow, who are remodeling and reframing Livingstone's home birthplace so that it makes sense in the 21st century and sort of examines a lot of previously held positions, and working again in minstrelsy, that whole area of Negro delineation, as it was called, how it was such a powerful force in British entertainment between the 1850s to 1978, when you could still see black-faced minstrels. Those who are familiar with the tradition of the burnt cork of black grease paint applied to a white male performer's face, who would then proceed to pretend to be a black man from the southern states of America, singing about Alabama, watermelons, Mammy, Massa, sentimentally racist insanity, which was incredibly popular up until 1978. You've seen it on terrestrial television after the wrestling on Saturday afternoon. Yeah, also there's a number of river cruises which are being done, Black History river cruises, because so many of our histories are locked into that body of water running through this city. Yeah, so I'm busy, and it's of course Black History, so I'm done with something.
Well, thank you so much for sharing reading with us and for answering all of my questions. I wonder now if we can turn to the audience, if there's anyone in the physical room or anyone in the virtual room who wants to ask Steve any questions.
Yeah, you kind of already covered it, but I just wondered, do you prefer writing historical fiction or non-fiction, and kind of what challenges do you experience with fiction writing that you don't with non-fiction?
I think I prefer writing fiction because you can make more specific and twisted, more pertinent points. Because through fiction, I could address, and in this book, one of the things that I was able to address was the whole subject of so-called repatriation, or just basically throwing people out of the country, because between 1786 and 87, there were 3 ships rather, moored in Deptford, which were there to take away more than 300 members of the Black Poor in London. The Black Poor who Benjamin Franklin would certainly have seen. When he stepped from here, just going into the Strand, he would see many of their haunts. Many of the places he went, like Lincoln's Inn Fields, at one stage an encampment of the Black Poor. He would have definitely have seen them as it was saying, intruding upon the observation of the great and the good. So I wanted to look at that whole notion of getting rid, that whole notion of problem solving, where involving apparently unwanted ethnic groups, rather than redistributing resources, the people are simply removed. In this case, more than 300 of them were dumped, catastrophically in Sierra Leone.
it's really amazing in the book how you give voices to these figures. We actually previously spoke in the book with Michael Bundock, who
yes.
a biography of Francis Barber, and he spoke at length about the difficulty of, he described it as a sort of donut biography, because there's just this, if you're going very historically, there's the lack of the actual person's voice in their writing.
Yes.
So to be able to kind of fictionally imagine that is very powerful.
But I mean, one of the things that I'm very keen on as well is one of the things that I was accessing almost meditatively was the enormous amount of writing by Black people in 18th century and 19th century Britain. And it's this huge repository of just ideas, notions, some of it's questionable, let's say that, but it's just this body of information that is so under-accessed, underappreciated, and so many questions are being tackled in, say, parts of Equiano's writings, certainly in Ottawa-Guano's writings. And these are people who live and worship very close to where we're sitting now. And people like Robert Wedderburn is revolutionary fervour. I've actually forgotten the question you just posed to me, because as soon as I mentioned Robert Wedderburn, I did get very excited.
Just how one of the sort of potentially positives of fiction is being able to kind of fill in that voice, that if you're writing a strict historical biography, it's difficult to create because you haven't got the text. With some characters, but as you say, some of the figures wrote a great deal.
Yes, so my way around it was to channel those writers and to channel their attitudes and their positions. In fact, a couple of them appear in the text, and I have some knockabout fun with them. But I think it's important, as well as having heroes, just to see people as mortals like ourselves, humanize them.
Absolutely. And were there any more questions? I had one last question, if that's okay. You mentioned London as almost becoming a character, and I think that really comes across. And you spoke a bit about lots of archive research, but also this sort of walking the streets. I wondered how that played into it as well, the geography of it all, and the kind of very sort of tangible, physical nature of how you could.
Well, it was very much part of the writing process. I must have looked like a complete lunatic during the composition of this one, because I did spend a lot of time around St Giles, Seven Dials, Tottenham Court Road, Bankside, Vauxhall, and it wasn't written in a dream state, because a lot of that infrastructure is still here. You can actually reach out and touch these places. And for me, that was one of the big payoffs, because by way of propaganda, largely, one of the things that I like to do is walking tours of London, Black history walking tours of London. This history is everywhere, in every borough, in every neighbourhood, and especially on and along the Thames itself. It's alive. It's a story which is told in the stones, in the street names, and as someone who doesn't believe in ghosts or the supernatural, it's doubly alive for me in the fact that, in a sense, we, or people like me, are here because they were there as well.
Well, Steve, I just can't thank you enough for joining us here today. We're delighted to be able to welcome you here live in the house and to have an in-person audience. It's such an important story, and as you say, I hope there'll be many more in that vein, and we look forward to seeing your work in the heritage sector. There's lots of important things to be done there too. Before we go, I'll just let you know about a couple more book talks we have coming up next month in November. So next week on Wednesday the 3rd, we have Dr. Lindsay M. Shavinsky joining us virtually at 5 p.m. Talking about her book, The Cabinet, so all about George Washington forming the first cabinet. And then later in the month, we have a kind of book launch. And that is Washington and the Plough by Bruce A. Ragsdale. That's going to be on Tuesday, 25th of November, and that's another hybrid event. So if you'd be interested in booking to come in person or to join virtually, that's at 5 p.m. on Tuesday, the 23rd of November. So thank you so much again, everyone, for joining. Thank you. Thank you, Steve.